Linden blossom is probably one of my favorite infusions. Definitely a go-to, definitely a favorite of my 7-year-old daughter as well. And so what are working with when we're working with linden, we're working with the whole blossoms, ideally, if you can get them. I find the whole blossoms from Frontier Co-op. If you can only find cut and sifted, you can work with that as well. I just prefer the flavor and texture of the whole blossoms. But you have, so you have this is like the flower itself. And then it also comes with what looks like our leaves, but are actually the samara. If you think of, which is part of the flower, it's attached to the flower. And they're pale yellow, and the leaves of the linden tree are dark green and kind of heart-shaped. So this is the whole blossom is the flower and the samara. I think of the samara as like, the helicopter seeds that come from maple trees that have the wings on it that help to spread the seeds further away from the base of the tree. Well, that's what that essentially is. And so the linden blossom, Tilia is the genus of linden, also known as American basswood, or in Europe, it's the lime tree. And so there's about 30 different species around the world of linden, and they can all be used interchangeably. All parts of the plant are safe and medicinal, edible, but it's really the blossom that we're working with. If there are leaves in there, that's not a big problem at all. I find the leaves tend to have more tannins in them. If I harvest them myself, it's just a lot easier to harvest some of the leaf and flower together. And I've made infusions with that, and that's fine. No worries, but it's also, because it can be kind of meticulous just harvesting the flower, the blossom. And the window as to when you can harvest the blossom is pretty short. Here in Maine, it's usually around July 4th, and depending on the weather, if it rains, then the blossoms, have a limited lifespan for sure. So it's usually just 1 or 2 weeks anyway that they're in bloom. So keep your eye on your linden trees, and definitely if you can, and if you can reach the blossoms is the other issue. Although a lot of linden trees have some nice low branches, or there are some cultivars of linden that just generally grow smaller. They're often planted in cities, on city sidewalks, and in parking lots of malls because they are such a beautiful tree. So you could also plant one in your yard if you felt so inclined. Definitely protect it from the deer. I've planted some, and the deer have eaten them, so they never really took off. As far as the infusion herbs go, the linden blossom is not loaded with minerals or vitamins, and doesn't really contain a lot of protein either. So this is one plant, if you were going to make all of your infusions, like say it for the week on Sunday, and keep them in your fridge strain one each day, linden could be one of the last ones that you do, because it will last longer than the ones that are more protein and mineral rich. So why are we working and drinking linden in our infusions? And really it's because it is a really wonderful anti-inflammatory or inflammation modulating herb. Plus it has a lot of other benefits as well. So we'll get into that. But first I'm going to start straining this infusion that I made last night of the linden. So with the linden, especially if you are using cut and sifted, but cut and sifted or whole leaf, we only use half an ounce of the linden instead of a full ounce. I will use a full ounce if I am sick, or if I have a really sore throat, or if I'm really going for the medicinal benefits for some acute reason. But for general health and just as a daily infusion, just a half of an ounce is fine instead of a full ounce. So, and this is what a half ounce looks like. It's so light and fluffy, and it takes up a lot of space. So if it was a full ounce, it would probably be the whole jar, right? So a half ounce is fine. This is the weighed half ounce. And because Linden has a lot of these mucilaginous polysaccharides, which makes polysaccharides as many chained sugar, right? Saccharide being sugar. And mucilaginous, well, slimy, right? And that is a wonderful property that a lot of herbs have. It makes, or constituent, it's gives them the property of being really, or the action of being very demulcent internally, very soothing to mucous membranes, and emollient externally to the skin. Very, very soothing, very anti-inflammatory, and very cooling for if you have like really red or inflamed skin, or even any sort of mucous membrane tissues internally. So anytime I think of herbs that are really have these mucilaginous polysaccharides, you can really think of all mucous membranes in the body are going to be supported by these herbs, and by Linden especially. So, and even the consistency of the infusion, you might notice it takes longer to strain because it's a lot thicker in nature. And with the cut and sifted flour, it's going to be even thicker. You get more mucilage from it. If you don't like that texture, you can warm up your infusion and it will kind of thin out the infusion. I personally love it. It just feels so soothing and nourishing. So it is nourishing because it really supports mucous membranes. Well, what are some examples of mucous membranes? Basically, I think of mucous membranes as anything that comes in contact with the outside world, whether it's coming in contact with the outside world, but internally, like if you think of that classic image of a human being essentially like a donut. So we have our external body and then the internal chambers that come in contact with the air that we breathe or the food that we eat. And so I kind of consider that as coming in contact with the outside world. A lot of immune cells are all wrapped around and involved with those mucous membranes because, again, that's where we come in contact with the outside world. So our body needs to protect us in those places. So if we can really support the mucous membrane tissues, we're also really supporting our first immune defense as well. So mucous membranes would be, our skin, our sinuses, our whole digestive tract going from the mouth all the way out. If you touch the inside of your cheek with your tongue, that is a classic mucous membrane right there. Our lungs, our urinary tract, and our reproductive organs all have mucous membranes as well. Okay, so we've got our infusion. Now, if you really want that demulcent property of the Linden, you can actually do a rebrew with the Linden. So you could take, instead of really squeezing all of this out, you can, to get more of the mucilage out of it, you can put this in a small sauce pot on your stove and put 2 cups of water in that and bring it up to a boil and then take it off the heat and let it sit for 2 to 4 hours. And it will draw out more of that mucilage, especially once it cools. So those mucilaginous properties, those mucilaginous polysaccharides actually extract better in cold water than they do in a hot water. And you can really feel them better in a cold drink than in a hot drink. So what I've personally find, I feel like I get plenty of the mucilage out of it, especially when I squeeze out my plant material. But you could always try to do a rebrew, and that's fine too, especially if you feel like when you touch your plant material after you've strained it, if it's still really slimy, then you could do a rebrew and get more out of it. But so the infusion, we first hit it with the boiling hot water, but by the time we strain it out, it's been cold. And you can even, before straining your infusion at room temperature, you can stick it in the fridge for a couple hours if you want to get like a really nice cold water extraction with your linden, and that's fine too. So even though it looked like, the jar was half full of linden blossoms, I still got a full jar of infusion because there's just so much air in the blossoms. And that's just really beautiful. It smells like a flower. It's really delicate and sweet. And as I said, my daughter loves it. So not only is it giving us the anti-inflammatory mucilaginous polysaccharides, it also has some other flavonoids in it, including quercetin. So all in all, the reason why the linden is in the major 5-plant nourishing infusion rotation that Susan Weed originally came up with is because it is so inflammation modulating or anti-inflammatory if you have excessive inflammation. And as we know, many, many, many disease states either start with inflammation or cause more inflammation in the body. It's how our body reacts to assaults and disease a lot of times. So any type of inflammation in the body, linden's really beneficial for quelching. Now in Europe, the linden is commonly made as a tea for the cold and flu season, and as a child's tea just to help to kind of calm and soothe children. So you could just drink it as a tea as well. Benefits the immune system, as I was saying, classic cold and flu remedy, especially in France. But anytime my daughter or I get sick, I'm brewing linden infusion to the hilt, and we're always drinking that. It's so soothing on sore throats or inflamed membranes. Really helpful if you have a cough. Again, just very soothing and restoring to the mucous membranes of the respiratory system. And it supports immune health in general and can also help to reduce fevers. So it's just a great cold and flu herb to have on hand. Also really beneficial for the cardiovascular system, both the emotional heart and the physical heart. One of my mentors, Katya Swift, always talks about linden being like a hug in a mug, and I just love that image, and it really does feel that way when you drink linden. It's just like, it just feels so good. It can really uplift emotions of the heart if there's depression or heartache, heartbreak. But then also on the physical level, it can help to prevent arteriosclerosis or any sort of tension within the cardiovascular system. It can kind of help to quell, and then also to keep those blood vessels flexible. There was something it might be John Lust's herb book that talks about linden, maybe if you drink too much of it, being counterproductive for the heart or maybe having negative effects on the heart. But I think that has been, and also in one of the earlier versions of Peterson's Field Guide to Medicinal Plants, that was included in there as well. But in the newer versions, it's actually been taken out. I think that theory has been debunked, and that it's really been realized that linden is just very beneficial for the heart. And I haven't really heard of any really negative aspects to ingesting linden or contraindications. I haven't really heard of any. It's just such a gentle, mild herb, great for elders, great for children, and everyone in between. Also really beneficial for the nervous system. Again, similar to the oat straw. If you feel anxious or stressed or exhausted, frazzled, frayed, if you just feel overwhelmed, like all of those are really feelings that can be quelled a bit with drinking Linden infusion, Nourishing herbal infusion. And then also just nerve pain and neuralgia. Linden can really help to reduce that, again, any sort of pain that's also caused by inflammation. I talked a little bit about the benefits to the respiratory system, but definitely just the integrity of the lungs, the lining of the lungs. If there's any inflammation in the lungs, it's going to help to quell that. Any sort of cough, it can just really help to restore health to the lungs and the respiratory system as a whole. Urinary tract, again, another mucous membrane, so mild benefit there. Digestive system, very similar to, you hear a lot of people working with marshmallow root, and so for digestive health and for heartburn health and preventing and healing from heartburn and any sort of acidic burns in the esophagus. Linden has the same benefit, the same constituents, those same mucilaginous polysaccharides, and can be just as beneficial, if not more, because I think it does have actually more of those polysaccharides from my general experience. Also, just any sort of pain in the digestive system, bloating, indigestion, so in the intestines or in the stomach, any sort of issues throughout, very beneficial. Also, the reproductive system, more like if you have PMS or tension, cramping, inflammation in the uterus, it can just kind of help to ease and quell that. Even hot flashes, because it's so cooling and soothing, it can help to ease that as well. And then skin, anti-inflammatory. If you have red, itchy rashes, eczema, acne, anything like that, both Linden internally and externally can be really beneficial. Also, I blew out my knee and I was using Linden as, I would drink my Linden infusion as the anti-inflammatory, and then I would just take the, basically this fabric that was full of the Linden and still moist, and you can just feel that mucilaginous there too on the fabric, and I would just use this as a fomentation, like on the wound or on the knee. It wasn't a wound, it was a bad injury. So also you could put your Linden infusion in bath water and just to kind of soothe, or you could use it as a sitz bath where you would sit in it if you have irritated membranes down there. So full spectrum of benefits of the Linden, and I hope that if it's really easy to harvest and dry. If you have a Linden tree, I just take the Linden and just leave it in a basket and it dries really easily. So cheers to Linden. I hope you enjoy it. Yum.